The champagne glass didn't just break. It exploded against the marble floor, silencing the entire ballroom. All eyes turned to me, the clumsy mother of the bride. But I wasn't looking at the glass. I was looking at the groom. He had a new name and a new haircut, but those cold, dead eyes were the same ones that watched me beg for mercy 10 years ago. Hello everyone, I am Mary. In my 60 years on this earth, I have seen families torn apart by secrets. But this story changes everything. The ballroom was suffocatingly hot, despite the blast of air conditioning that rattled the crystal chandeliers overhead. I tugged at the high collar of my navy silk dress, feeling the fabric cling to my damp skin, like a second suffocating layer. Around me, the elite of the city buzzed like swarming insects, holding flutes of golden champagne and laughing with their heads thrown back. It was a sound that grated against my ears, a harsh metallic ringing that made my teeth ache. I was supposed to be the happy mother of the bride. I was supposed to be beaming with pride as my only daughter Sophie paraded her new life in front of these strangers. But all I felt was a heavy leaden dread, settling in the pit of my stomach. My fingers gripped the cold stem of my wine glass so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had not met him yet. The man who had swept my sensible, cautious daughter off her feet in a whirlwind 6-month romance. Sophie had kept him hidden away, citing his busy travel schedule and his shyness. But I knew better. I knew she was afraid of my judgment. She knew I saw the world through the lens of a survivor, looking for cracks in the armor of every man who smiled too brightly. I navigated through the crowd, my heels sinking slightly into the plush crimson carpet. The smell of expensive perfume and roasted garlic was thick in the air, making me slightly nauseous. I scanned the room, looking for Sophie's familiar blonde curls. I found her near the patio doors, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. She looked radiant, her head thrown back in laughter, her hand resting possessively on the arm of a man whose back was turned to me. He was tall with broad shoulders, clad in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than my car. He leaned in close to her, whispering something that made her blush a deep rosy pink. I took a step forward, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be the cynical old woman who was just paranoid. But then he turned around. The world did not stop spinning, but it slowed down to a terrifying crawl. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar, like the sound of blood rushing in my ears. I knew that face. I knew the sharp angle of his jaw, the calculated sweep of his dark hair, now peppered with distinguished gray, and those eyes, those terrifying piercing blue eyes that looked like frozen chips of ice. He was smiling that same devastating charm that had once made me feel like the only woman in the world. But back then he had called himself Richard. Back then he had not been a wealthy investment banker, but a grieving widower who understood my pain. Back then he had not been marrying my daughter. He had been systematically destroying my credit, my savings, and my sanity. My lungs seized. I tried to inhale, but the air felt thin and useless. The room tilted violently to the left. He scanned the crowd, his gaze sliding over faces, with the practiced indifference of a predator assessing a herd. Then his eyes locked onto mine. For a heartbeat, just a single terrifying second, the mask slipped. I saw the flash of recognition, the widening of his eyes, the tightening of his mouth. He knew me. He remembered the woman he had left bankrupt and broken in a cold apartment 7 years ago. But just as quickly as the crack appeared, it vanished. He smoothed his expression into a look of polite curiosity, the perfect picture of a son-in-law meeting a stranger. The audacity of it struck me like a physical blow. He was not going to run. He was not going to panic. He was going to play the game, right here in front of everyone. My hand went numb. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, the golden liquid catching the light. As it tumbled end over end, it hit the marble floor at the edge of the carpet, with a sound that seemed louder than a gunshot. The glass exploded, sending shards skittering across the polished stone. The chatter in the room died instantly. 100 heads turned in my direction. The silence was absolute, heavy and judgmental. I could feel their eyes on me, branding me as the clumsy aging mother who could not handle her liquor. But I could not look at the glass. I could not look at the guests. I could only stare at the man standing next to my daughter. He did not flinch. He did not jump. He just watched me with a small amused smile playing on his lips, as if he were enjoying the show. My knees buckled and I had to grab the edge of a table to keep from collapsing into the mess I had made. This was not a wedding. This was a war. Sophie was at my side in an instant. Her silk chiffon dress swished against my legs as she crouched down, ignoring the jagged shards of crystal that threatened to tear the expensive fabric. "Mom, are you all right?" Her voice was pitched high with worry, but underneath the concern, I heard a sharp note of embarrassment. She gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh with frantic strength. I could not answer her. My tongue felt swollen and heavy in my mouth like a piece of dead meat. I could not tear my gaze away from the man standing behind her. He moved with a terrifying grace, unbuttoning his suit jacket as he knelt beside us. He did not look at the broken glass. He looked only at me with a performance of concern so flawless, it made my stomach turn. "Allow me," he said softly. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth as velvet and just as suffocating. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm was warm and dry, but to me it felt like a branding iron. I flinched violently, pulling away from his touch, with a gasp that sounded too loud in the silent room. "Mom, stop it," Sophie hissed under her breath, her eyes darting to the staring guests. "You are making a scene." I scrambled backward, my heels scraping against the floor, until my back hit the leg of the table. I felt trapped, small and infinitely vulnerable. "It is him," I whispered. The words came out as a ragged croak, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. Sophie frowned, shaking her head as if trying to clear a buzzing fly. "What are you talking about?" I pointed a shaking finger at the man, who was currently picking up large pieces of glass, with his bare hands playing the hero for the crowd. "That man. That is Richard. He ruined me." Sophie stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to something colder. "Mom, this is Thomas. Thomas Sterling. We talked about this. You promised you would be on your best behavior." Thomas looked up then, his blue eyes filled with a pity that was more insulting than hatred. "Is this the confusion you mentioned, darling?" he asked Sophie gently, completely ignoring my accusation. The confusion. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He had already planted the seed. He had told her I was confused. I tried to stand, but my legs were shaking so badly, I could barely find my footing. "I am not confused," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "I know who you are. I know what you did to me in Chicago. You stole everything. You left me with nothing but debt and shame." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd near us. They thought I was drunk. They thought I was senile. Thomas stood up, dusting his hands off on a napkin a waiter had hurriedly provided. He looked at Sophie with a sad, understanding smile. "It is the stress," he said quietly, loud enough for the onlookers to hear, but soft enough to sound intimate. "You told me she has been struggling since your father passed. The grief can manifest in strange ways." Sophie bit her lip, tears shimmering in her eyes. She looked at me not as her mother, who had protected her for 30 years, but as a burden she had to manage. "I am so sorry, Thomas," she said, her voice thick with humiliation. She has been having these episodes lately. Episodes. I stared at my daughter in horror. I had never had an episode in my life. I was the head librarian at the county public library. I managed complex budgets and organized community programs. I was sharp and capable. But in the span of 30 seconds, this man had reduced me to a confused elderly woman having a breakdown. I realized then, with a jolt of pure terror, that he had been preparing for this moment for months. He knew I would recognize him. He knew I would react. And he had weaponized my own trauma against me before I even stepped into the room. "Come on, Mom," Sophie said, gripping my elbow firmly. "Let us get you some water and sit you down in the quiet room. You are not yourself." I looked into Thomas's eyes one last time as she led me away. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a tiny salute of victory. He had won the first battle without ever raising a weapon. The drive home was a blur of tears and humiliation, but by the time I locked my front door, the sadness had hardened into something cold and sharp. I did not go to bed. Sleep was a luxury for people who were not being hunted. I marched straight to the hall closet and pulled down the heavy plastic bin I had shoved to the back shelf 7 years ago. It was my box of shame. Inside were the charred remains of the life Richard had burned to the ground. Bank statements showing withdrawals I never authorized, credit card bills for jewelry I never wore, and legal letters from lawyers telling me there was nothing they could do. I sat on the hardwood floor of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my financial ruin. The house was silent, except for the humming of the refrigerator and the wind rattling the loose pane in the bay window. I dug through the papers until I found it. A single grainy photograph printed on cheap paper. It was taken at a diner in Chicago. Richard was laughing, his hand raised to block the camera. It was blurry, but the hairline, the jaw, and the cruel set of the eyes were unmistakable. I held it up to the light, my hand trembling not with fear but with rage. It was him. There was no doubt in my mind. I moved to the kitchen table and flipped open my laptop. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light that stung my tired eyes. I typed Thomas Sterling into the search bar and hit enter. The results populated instantly: a professional website for Sterling Wealth Management, a LinkedIn profile with 500 connections, a few articles in local business journals praising his philanthropic work. On the surface, he was a pillar of the community, a perfect specimen of success. But I was a librarian. Research was my trade, and I knew how to look for the spaces between the facts. I started scrolling back. I looked for graduation dates, employment history prior to 2020. There was nothing. No university records. No high school yearbooks digitized on ancestry sites. No marriage licenses. No property records. Thomas Sterling had apparently sprung fully formed from the earth just 4 years ago. I dug deeper. I checked the domain registration for his business website. It was created 3 years ago. I checked the metadata on his profile pictures. They were all recent. I went to the state licensing board website to check his investment credentials. His license number was valid, but the issue date was only 36 months old. My breath hitched in my throat. Patricia Newman, the private investigator I had hired back in Chicago, had told me about men like this. They did not just change their names. They built entirely new skins. They created a digital fortress so thick and shiny that no one bothered to look at the foundation. But the lack of history was the smoking gun. A man of 55 does not exist without a past, unless he is hiding one. I printed everything. The website, the photos, the timeline. The printer rhythmically churned out page after page, a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet house. I was not crazy. I was not confused. I was the only person in the world who saw the monster for what he was. And I knew that internet searches would not be enough to convince Sophie. I needed to look him in the eye again. I needed to make him slip. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 3 in the morning. I poured the cold dregs of coffee from the pot into a mug and drank it black and bitter. I had a plan, but it required me to walk back into the lion's den. I chose a French bistro downtown for the meeting. It was neutral ground, public enough to ensure my safety, but quiet enough that a hushed conversation would not be overheard by the tables nearby. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth with a view of the entrance. My purse sat heavy on my lap, hiding the small digital recorder I had purchased at an electronics store that morning. It was old-school technology, but I did not trust the cloud and I did not trust my phone. I watched the door, my hands wrapped around a glass of sparkling water that had long since gone flat. Every time the bell above the door chimed, my stomach twisted into a hard knot. I had texted Sophie earlier, telling her I wanted to apologize to Thomas personally, to clear the air. She had been so relieved, so desperate for peace, that she had set it up immediately. She had no idea she was sending her mother into a cage match with a shark. He arrived exactly on time, not a minute early, not a minute late. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, open at the collar. He looked younger than his 55 years, vital and healthy in a way that felt like a personal insult, considering the years of stress he had etched onto my face. He spotted me immediately and smiled. It was the smile of a man who owned the room, who owned the building, who owned the world. He slid into the booth opposite me, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and confident masculinity. "Margaret," he said smoothly, using my full name, "I am glad you reached out. Sophie was very worried about you." I forced the muscles of my face into a tight grimace that I hoped looked like an apology. "I wanted to explain myself," I said. "I wanted to apologize for the scene I caused. I have been under a lot of stress." He ordered an espresso from the waiter, his French pronunciation perfect and pretentious. When we were alone again, he leaned back, crossing his arms. "I understand," he said. "Mothers can be very protective, especially when they are feeling marginalized." The word was a calculated barb. He was telling me I was irrelevant. I took a deep breath and decided to drop the act. I reached into my purse, but not for the recorder. I pulled out the photo from the diner in Chicago. I slid it face down across the white tablecloth. "I do not want your forgiveness, Richard," I said, my voice low and steady. "I want to know how much. How much do you plan to take from her?" He looked at the back of the photo, then up at me. His expression did not change. He did not look nervous. He slowly used one manicured finger to slide the photo back toward me, without turning it over. "I think you should put that away, Margaret," he said softly, "before you embarrass yourself again." I leaned forward. The recorder in my purse was running. I needed a confession. I needed a name. "I know about the gap in your history," I hissed. "I know Thomas Sterling did not exist before 2020. I know about the romance scams in Chicago and the investment fraud. I will go to the police." He laughed then. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Go to them. Tell them your conspiracy theories. Tell them the wealthy fiancé of your daughter is actually a ghost from your past. Do you know what they will see? They will see a lonely, bitter woman who is trying to sabotage her daughter's happiness because she cannot stand to be alone. They will see exactly what Sophie sees, a mother who is losing her grip on reality." I felt the blood drain from my face. He was right. He had built the narrative so perfectly that the truth sounded like madness. "But why Sophie?" I asked, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. "Why my daughter? There are thousands of women with money. Why come back to the family you already destroyed?" He took a sip of his espresso, his eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the cup. The mask fell away then. The warmth vanished, leaving only the cold reptilian stare I remembered from my nightmares. "Because it is efficient," he said simply. "I already know the family dynamic. I know the weak points. And frankly, Margaret, watching you squirm adds a certain texture to the experience. It is a bonus." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled my blood. And if you try to stop me, if you try to poison her against me, I will not just take her money. I will break her. I will isolate her from everyone she knows. I will make her question her own sanity, just like I am doing to you. And when I am done with her, she will be a shell, a broken, empty thing that no one will ever want again. He sat back and smiled that charming public smile as the waiter returned with the check. Think about it, Mom. Do you want to be at the wedding, or do you want to be in a jagged little institution while I toast to our future? He stood up, dropped $100 bill on the table, and walked away, leaving me shivering in the warm restaurant, with a recording that I knew was useless, because he had never once admitted to a crime. He had only promised a future one. The silence in my house became a physical weight in the days following that lunch. It pressed against the windows and settled into the dust motes, dancing in the afternoon light. I spent hours staring at the phone, praying it would ring, but terrified of what I would hear if it did. When the call finally came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the ringtone shattered the quiet, like a brick through a window. It was Sophie. Her voice was brittle and tight, sounding less like my daughter, and more like a stranger, reading from a script. "We need to talk, Mom," she said. She did not ask how I was. She did not say hello. She just delivered the summons. She arrived an hour later, standing on my front porch, in a raincoat that dripped water onto the welcome mat. She did not hug me. She did not take off her shoes. She stood in the entryway with her arms crossed over her chest, creating a barrier between us that felt miles wide. "Thomas and I have made a decision," she said, not looking me in the eye. She was looking at the family photos on the wall, specifically a picture of the two of us at her college graduation. "We are moving the wedding up. We are getting married next Saturday at the courthouse." My heart stopped. Next Saturday. That was 10 days away. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why the rush, Sophie? Is he in trouble? Is he running from something?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes blazing with a sudden fierce anger. "Stop it," she snapped. "Just stop it. This is exactly why we are doing this. Thomas has an incredible business opportunity in London. He needs to relocate by the end of the month, and we want to be married before we go. We do not want a big spectacle anymore. We just want to start our lives." London. The word hung in the damp air. He was taking her out of the country. He was taking her to a place where the laws were different, where I could not reach her, where she would be completely and utterly alone with him. "Sophie, listen to me," I pleaded, stepping forward and reaching for her hand. She flinched away, as if I were contagious. "He is isolating you. This is what predators do. They create a rush. They create an emergency. They move you away from your family and your support system so you have no one to turn to when the mask slips." Sophie shook her head, a look of disgust twisting her features. "The only person isolating me is you, Mom. Thomas warned me you would say this. He told me you would try to spin his success into something sinister because you cannot handle me leaving the nest. He said you are projecting your own trauma onto him." Thomas said. Thomas said. Thomas said. My brilliant independent daughter, who had graduated top of her class in law school, was now nothing more than a mouthpiece for a con man. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. "He has brainwashed you," I whispered. "He has turned you against your own mother." "No," Sophie said, her voice cold and final. "You did that yourself. You embarrassed me at the party. You stalked him on the internet. You cornered him at lunch and accused him of crimes he did not commit. You are toxic, Mom. You are drowning in your own bitterness, and I cannot let you pull me down with you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She opened it to reveal a pair of diamond earrings I had given her for her 30th birthday. She placed them on the hallway table. I do not want your gifts, she said. And I do not want your negativity. We talked about it, and we think it is best if you do not come to the ceremony next Saturday. The words hit me hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Uninvited. Banned from my only child's wedding. But Sophie, I choked out, tears finally spilling over. I am your mother. I love you. Then let me go, she said, her voice breaking just a little, the first crack in her armor. If you love me, let me be happy. Stop trying to destroy the only good thing in my life. She turned and walked out the door, into the rain. I watched her go, watched her get into her car, and drive away without looking back. I stood in the open doorway until the cold, damp air soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. He had done it. He had severed the limb. He had taken the one weapon I had left, which was my access to her, and he had snapped it in half. I closed the heavy oak door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. The house was silent. It was not the peaceful silence of a library, but the hollow echoing silence of a tomb. For 3 days I did not leave that house. I moved through the rooms like a phantom, touching the objects Sophie had left behind. Her old field hockey stick in the mudroom, the mug she used for tea which was still sitting in the sink, the graduation photo on the mantel. Thomas had done more than just steal my money 7 years ago. He had stolen my confidence. Now he was back to finish the job by stealing my legacy. I realized with a sudden cold clarity that I had been playing right into his hands. I had been reacting emotionally, screaming and crying and accusing. That was exactly what he wanted. It fed his narrative. It made me look like the hysterical mother, and him like the patient victim. If I kept fighting him with anger, I would lose. I needed to fight him with ice. I went to the basement where I kept the oldest files. The air down there smelled of damp cardboard and memories. I dug through a box labeled 2018 until I found it. A small white business card, the edges soft and yellowed with age. Detective Frank Miller, Chicago Police Department. He was the man who had taken my statement all those years ago. He was the one who had looked at me with sad, tired eyes and told me that men like Richard were ghosts, who slipped through the cracks of the legal system because what they did was technically hard to prove as theft. They called it a gift. They called it a bad investment. I stared at the number. It had been 7 years. He was probably retired. He probably would not remember the weeping librarian who had lost her life savings. But he was the only person on earth who knew the truth besides me. My hands shook as I dialed the number on my landline. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when a voice answered. It was rough and gravely, sounding like it had been scraped over concrete. Miller. I took a breath that rattled in my chest. Detective Miller. My name is Mary. You might not remember me, but 7 years ago, a man named Richard stole $75,000 from me. There was a pause, a long static-filled silence. Then I heard the distinct sound of a lighter flicking and a long exhale of smoke. I remember you, Mary. You were the only victim who brought me a spreadsheet of his spending habits. You were organized. I gripped the phone cord, twisting it around my finger. He is back, Frank. He is here in my city. He has a new name and a new face, and in 7 days, he is going to marry my daughter and take her to London. Frank let out a low whistle. London. That is a one-way ticket, Mary. Once he gets her over there and drains the accounts, she will be lucky if he leaves her enough for a plane ticket home. Or worse. The implication hung heavy in the air. Or worse meant an accident. A fall from a balcony. A car crash on a wet road. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I tried to warn her, Frank. She thinks I am crazy. He has convinced her. I am jealous and unstable. She uninvited me from the wedding. Frank hummed a low, thoughtful sound. Of course he did. That is the playbook. Isolate the victim, discredit the witnesses. He is good, I will give him that. So what do? I asked, my voice cracking. I cannot go to the police here. I have no proof. I searched his records and he is a ghost. Listen to me, Mary, Frank said, his voice sharpening, losing its tired edge. The law cannot help you. Not in 7 days. If we try to open a formal investigation, he will spook and run, or he will accelerate the timeline. We cannot play by the rules because he burned the rulebook. We have to trap him. How? I asked. How do I trap a man who is smarter than me? He is not smarter than you, Frank said. He is just more ruthless. But he has a weakness. All these guys have the same weakness. It is not money, it is ego. He thinks he has already won. He thinks you are defeated. So you have to show him exactly what he expects to see. You have to surrender. You have to go to him and beg. And then when his guard is down, you offer him the one thing he cannot resist. What is that? I whispered. A bigger payday, Frank said. You are going to offer him a bribe to leave her. And when he takes it, we are going to be watching. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and scrubbed my face until the skin was red and raw. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like the broken woman Thomas Sterling believed he had created. I skipped the concealer that hid the dark circles under my eyes, and I let my hair hang limp and flat against my cheeks. I chose a beige cardigan that was 2 sizes too big and smelled faintly of mothballs, wrapping it around myself like a shroud of surrender. The woman staring back at me was not the fierce protector who had raised a daughter alone. She was a ghost, a fragile elderly thing that was fading away. It was the best acting performance of my life. I called Thomas at 9 in the morning. My voice trembled not with fear, but with a calculated frailty. I asked for 10 minutes. I told him I had a wedding gift. I told him I wanted to surrender. He made me wait in the lobby of his office building for 45 minutes. It was a power move designed to remind me of my place. The building was a glass needle, piercing the gray sky of the financial district. Everything about it screamed money. The floors were polished granite that clicked sharply under the heels of the young professionals rushing past me. The air smelled of ozone and expensive coffee. I sat on a low leather bench, my hands clutching my purse like a lifeline. Inside that purse was a checkbook, and the recording device Frank had told me to tape to the inside of the lining. When his assistant finally came for me, she looked at my old cardigan with a thin sneer of pity. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," she said. She led me down a long corridor lined with abstract art that looked like violent slashes of paint on canvas. Thomas was sitting behind a desk that was wide enough to land a small plane on. The city skyline was framed perfectly behind him, turning him into a silhouette against the clouds. He did not stand up when I entered. He did not offer me a seat. He just watched me walk the long, lonely stretch of carpet to his desk, his fingers steepled under his chin. He looked like a king, granting an audience to a peasant. I sat in the chair opposite him, sinking low into the soft leather. "I am sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I kept my eyes on my lap, studying the frayed threads of my sleeve. "You were right, Thomas. I have been unwell. The stress of the wedding, and the memories of the past. It all got confused in my head." He let the silence stretch out, savoring my apology like a fine wine. "I am glad you realized that, Margaret," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Sophie has been very distraught. She worries about you. But she needs to focus on her future now, not on your past delusions." I nodded meekly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I know. And that is why I came. I want to make things right. I know I cannot come to the wedding. I accept that. But I cannot let my daughter go to London without knowing she is secure. I reached into my purse, and his eyes tracked the movement with the sharp instinct of a shark sensing blood. I pulled out my checkbook. I lied to you, Thomas, I said, looking up at him through my lashes. I lied to everyone. When Richard stole my savings 7 years ago, he did not get everything. I had an inheritance from my aunt that I kept hidden. A rainy day fund. It has been sitting in a trust gathering interest. I paused, letting the lie settle in the air between us. I saw the change in him instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a predatory alertness. His pupils dilated. How much, he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing to hide the hunger in his voice. $200,000, I lied. I want to give it to you. For the move. For the wedding expenses. To prove that I trust you to take care of her. I opened the checkbook and uncapped my pen, my hand shaking with a tremor that was only half fake. But I need you to promise me something. Anything, Margaret, he said, leaning forward, his elbows hitting the mahogany desk. What do you need? I need you to promise you will not tell Sophie where it came from, I said. She is so proud. She would not take it if she knew it was from me. Tell her it is a bonus. Tell her it is a return on an investment. Just take care of her. I started to write. I wrote the date. I wrote his name, Thomas Sterling. I watched the ink bleed into the paper, sealing his fate. He was practically vibrating with greed. He saw a broken old woman handing over her last safety net, and he could not resist. He reached across the desk, his hand open and waiting. I tore the check from the book, with a sound that ripped through the quiet office. Here, I said, holding it out. Please, just make her happy. He snatched the paper from my fingers, his eyes scanning the numbers, the signature, the reality of the money. I promise, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I will take very good care of it. I walked out of that building with my knees shaking so violently. I had to lean against the cold stone facade of the entrance, just to keep upright. The adrenaline that had sustained me in his office was draining away, leaving a hollow, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had just handed a check for $200,000 to a man I knew was a criminal. It was drawn on an account that had less than $500 in it. When that check bounced in 48 hours, Thomas Sterling would know I had played him. He would know the war was back on. I had 2 days. 2 days to turn his greed into a noose before he realized the rope was fake. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy. I dialed Frank. He picked up on the first ring. Did he take it? Frank asked, his voice tight. He took it, I whispered. He did not even hesitate, Frank. He looked at that money like a starving dog looks at a steak. He promised he would keep it a secret from Sophie. Good, Frank said. That is the nail in the coffin. Now we wait. I have a buddy in the fraud department at the bank. We flagged that check number. As soon as he tries to deposit it, we will know where the money is going. If he puts it in a joint account for the wedding, he is just a greedy fiancé. But if he puts it in a private account, if he tries to hide it, then we have proof of intent. Proof that he is stockpiling cash for a getaway. Go home, Mary. Lock your doors. It is going to get ugly fast. But I could not go home. I drove to the library parking lot and sat there, watching the rain streak the windshield, turning the world into a gray smear. I felt exposed, naked. I had poked the bear, and now I was waiting for the teeth. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Sophie. Thomas told me you came by. He said you apologized. Thank you, Mom. I know how hard that was for you. I stared at the screen, my heart breaking. He was playing her even now. He had told her I apologized, but he had left out the part about the money. He was keeping the cash for himself, just like I knew he would. He was hoarding resources, preparing for the exit. The next 24 hours were a blur of agonizing silence. I paced my living room until I had worn a path in the rug. I jumped at every shadow. Then at 3 in the afternoon on Friday, Frank called. The tone in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. We got him Mary. He deposited the check via mobile app an hour ago. And guess where it went? It did not go to a wedding fund. It did not go to his business. It went to an account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a shell company, the same shell company used in the Chicago scam. We have a direct link. The check triggered the trace. We have him. I let out a sob that was half laugh and half scream. We had him. The link was established. But Frank was not done. There is a problem, Mary. The deposit triggered an alert, but it also triggered a notification to him that the funds are pending. He thinks he is rich. He feels invincible. And because of that, he is accelerating. I have a tail on him. He just picked up Sophie. They are heading to the rehearsal dinner venue. But Mary, he has a notary with him. A notary. My blood ran cold. Why would he need a notary at a rehearsal dinner? The trust fund. He was going to make her sign the transfer documents tonight. He was not waiting for the wedding. He was going to drain her dry before they even cut the cake. We have to stop him, I screamed, grabbing my keys. We are moving, Frank shouted over the sound of a siren. I am 10 minutes out. Meet me at the restaurant. Do not go inside alone, Mary. Do you hear me? Do not engage him until I get there. He is dangerous and he is cornered, even if he does not know it yet. I dropped the phone and ran. The rehearsal dinner was at the Sapphire Room, an upscale waterfront venue with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the harbor. It was 20 minutes away in heavy traffic. I drove like a maniac, cutting off taxis and running yellow lights. My daughter was about to sign away her life to a monster, and I was the only one who could stop the pen from hitting the paper. The Sapphire Room was glowing like a jewel against the dark water of the harbor. Through the glass walls I could see them. The wedding party was gathered around a long table draped in white linen. There was laughter. Toasts were being raised. And at the head of the table sat Sophie, looking radiant and unsuspecting, in a white cocktail dress. Beside her, Thomas Sterling leaned in, whispering in her ear, his hand resting possessively on the back of her neck. He looked like the perfect doting fiancé, but I saw the shark circling. He was checking his watch. He was signaling to a small gray-haired man, sitting quietly in the corner, the notary. I parked my car on the curb, ignoring the valet who waved frantically at me. I did not wait for Frank. I could not. I saw the notary stand up, pulling a folder from his briefcase. He was moving toward the table. I burst through the double doors, bringing a gust of cold, rainy wind with me. The heavy oak doors slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. The room went silent instantly. The laughter died. The music seemed to stop. Every head turned. I stood there, my hair wild from the wind, my old cardigan soaked through, looking exactly like the madwoman Thomas had painted me to be. But I did not care. I walked straight toward the head table, my eyes locked on the folder in the notary's hands. "Do not sign it, Sophie," I shouted, my voice raw and echoing in the cavernous room. "Do not sign a single thing." Sophie stood up, her face draining of color. "Mom," she gasped, her voice trembling with a mix of horror and fury. "What are you doing here? You promised. I told you if you caused another scene, I would never forgive you. Get out. Please just get out." Thomas stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with an infuriating calm. "Margaret," he said, his voice dripping with disappointed patience, "we talked about this. You are not well." I motioned for security, but I kept walking. I did not stop until I was standing on the opposite side of the table facing him. The notary froze halfway to the chair, clutching the folder to his chest. "I am perfectly well," Thomas the First said, my voice low and dangerous. Or should I call you Richard? Or maybe Marcus? Or whatever name is on that Cayman Islands account you just tried to deposit my check into? His eyes flickered, just for a second, a tiny microscopic twitch of fear. He recovered instantly, but I saw it, and more importantly, Sophie saw me see it. What check? She asked, looking between us, confusion warring with her anger. You said you apologized, Mom. You said you wanted peace. I did apologize, Sophie. I apologize for not protecting you sooner. I turned to Thomas. I gave him a check today, Sophie. $200,000. I told him it was a secret inheritance. I told him to keep it for your future. Sophie looked at Thomas. Is that true? Thomas laughed, a short, nervous sound. Darling, she is hallucinating. There was no check. She came to my office to beg to be invited. She was hysterical. I sent her away. That is a lie, I said, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. I have the confirmation right here. The deposit receipt, the routing number, and the destination. I held the screen up. Sophie squinted at it. The numbers were there. The name was there. But it was the look on Thomas's face that told the real story. The mask was slipping. The cool, confident investment banker was dissolving, revealing the cornered rat underneath. Security! Thomas yelled, his voice cracking. Get this woman out of here. She is harassing my fiancé. Two large men in black suits started toward me, but before they could reach me, the doors behind me burst open again. This time it was not a desperate mother. It was Frank Miller, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. Nobody moves, Frank bellowed, his voice filling the room with the authority of the law. Thomas Sterling, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The room erupted into chaos. Guests screamed. The notary dropped the folder, spilling papers across the floor. They were transfer documents, just as I had suspected. Sophie stood frozen in the center of the storm, looking from me to the police, to the man she was about to marry. And in that moment the illusion finally broke. Thomas did not go quietly. He did not hang his head in shame like a man caught in a mistake. He fought. Not with his fists but with his words, venom spewing from his mouth, as the officers forced his hands behind his back. The charming facade evaporated completely, leaving behind something ugly and raw. He turned to Sophie, his face twisted into a sneer that made him look 20 years older. You really are stupid, he spat, the words landing like physical blows. You actually thought someone like me would settle for someone like you. You were a job, Sophie. A paycheck. Nothing more. Sophie recoiled as if he had slapped her. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The brutality of the truth was worse than the lies. She watched as the officer tightened the handcuffs, the metal ratcheting shut with a finality that echoed in the silent room. Thomas looked at me then. His eyes were burning with a hatred so intense, it almost scorched the air between us. You ruined everything, you miserable old hag, he hissed. You should have just died in that library. I met his gaze, and for the first time in 7 years I did not feel fear. I felt pity. I pity you, Thomas the First said, my voice steady and strong. You have all these names and all these faces, but you have no one. You are going to die in a cage, and no one will even claim your body. They dragged him out, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him, cutting off his profanities. The silence that followed was deafening. The guests stood frozen, uncertain of whether to leave or stay. But I only had eyes for my daughter. Sophie stood by the table, her hands trembling. As she reached for the folder the notary had dropped, she opened it. Inside were the transfer documents, authorizing the immediate liquidation of her entire trust fund into an account managed by Sterling Wealth Management. She traced the line where her signature was supposed to go. One signature, one pen stroke, that was all that had stood between her and total ruin. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect bridal makeup. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking, you were right. He was going to take everything. I walked to her, ignoring the stares of her friends and colleagues. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She collapsed against me, sobbing into my wet cardigan, her body shaking with the force of her grief. "It is okay," I murmured, stroking her hair just like I did when she was a little girl. "You are safe. He cannot hurt you now. The money is safe. You are safe." It took 2 years for the trial to conclude. The evidence Frank Miller and I gathered was overwhelming. The check I gave him was the final piece of the puzzle, proving intent to defraud and tracing his shell companies back to a dozen other victims across the country. Thomas Sterling, or Marcus Webb as he was legally identified, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He will be an old man when he gets out, if he gets out at all. Sophie did not go to London. She stayed here in the city. She took 6 months off work to heal and to rebuild her sense of self. It was not easy. The betrayal left deep scars. She learned that trust is not something you give away freely. It is something that must be earned. We spend our Sundays together now. We cook dinner, we talk. We are closer than we have ever been because we walked through the fire together and came out the other side. Sometimes I look at the glass of wine in my hand, and I remember the sound of that champagne flute shattering on the marble floor. It was the sound of my life breaking apart, but it was also the sound of the truth breaking through. I learned that a mother's instinct is a powerful weapon. It is sharper than any law and stronger than any con. I saved my daughter, not because I was smart or brave, but because I refused to look away when everyone else did. And if the devil ever comes back to my door, he better be ready for a fight. Because this time, I know exactly how to win.